Warning, the following material is extremely disturbing. On Grave Matter, we try to be as accurate as possible and we collect information from many different sources. We don't condone or glorify murder, and we try to be as sensitive as possible to victims and their families while approaching a serious subject matter with a sense of humor. Listener discretion is advised.
All right. Welcome back to the Grave Matter for episode 3.
Hey, everybody. How's it going? I'm glad you're sticking with us, at least this far into it.
We appreciate it very much. We can use all the help we can get.
With any luck, we'll get better every episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And today's a cool one. We're actually going to be talking about the Corlls, as we call them, as I call them in my stupid attempt at humor. So the person I'm talking about is Carl Eugene Watts, or Corll, as in like Finding Nemo. Like I can't take credit for that. Jill said that earlier.
Corll, stay in the house.
I said this is more like Finding Nemo in a ditch 2 weeks later.
Oh, wow.
Okay, all right. I'm sorry. So Corll, as he was known, is the person I'm talking about, and then you're talking about Dean Corll, which is going to be a much longer and complicated version of what I have. So
yeah, I smell a two-parter coming up.
Yeah. So and
smell a number 2, my friend.
He's just done a lot. So and I'm interested to find out about him as well, because I don't know much about him. I certainly haven't done the extensive research that you did. But let's take a little bit and we'll talk about my guy first. Carl Eugene Watts, or Corll, as he was known. He was born in 1953, actually right here in Killeen, Texas. We're not in Killeen, but it's, like an hour away or whatever. Actually, how far is Killeen from here? Like, we're in Bertram, Texas.
Yeah, probably like an hour. I don't know.
Like an hour? Okay.
Maybe less. Like, we can hear them sometimes. We can hear them testing.
The artillery and stuff, right. So, and it's, for those of you who don't know, there's a huge military base there, Fort Hood, which this guy's dad worked at. He was just a PFC, so a low rank, just one above private. And then his mom was a teacher. So he was born in Killeen, Texas in 1953. And it didn't take long for them to figure out that he had some issues going on, but pretty quickly they moved to just outside of Detroit, Michigan, after the parents separated within a few years. So
that's a weird transition to go from Killeen to...
I don't think so, because if he was in the military, maybe that's, they had family there.
I mean, it's a culture shock.
Certainly colder. I don't know that much. I've worked when I worked for 7-Eleven, going around and checking out all the stores. That's a hell of a story, by the way. I went to Detroit and the Ann Arbor area, which some of this takes place in, and yeah, it's completely different. So that's kind of where he grew up, though, was the Detroit area. So he was up there, and just a little bit about this guy, kind of like a quick overview. Eventually, he would be known for 80 to 90 killings. Well, victims. I can't say killings because he only admitted to supposedly 40 or so. But 80 or 90 victims, 135 potential cases he was involved in that the police have identified. And this was wound up being not only in Michigan, but later in his life in Houston as well. So this all started in 1974, although he did say he started fantasizing about killing and torturing girls at age 12. And I find this super interesting because right around that age, he had a lot of stuff going on in school, right? So he wasn't the smartest student. He constantly fell behind. In high school, they said he only had like a 3rd grade reading level, which was pretty troublesome. But he kind of made up for it in becoming athletic. But immediately...
As you do.
Right? But immediately they noticed some issues. So he became very athletic, but he started fighting female classmates, obviously at a young age. And he would always try and pick fights with the girls. And he got in trouble for this.
So he specifically provoked the females?
Always, yeah. Never males. And he was great. He became a boxer. He was a boxer. I mean, he was strong. He probably could have fought anyone he wanted to. One of his victims later in life actually died because he punched her in the throat. That's what killed her. It completely crushed her windpipe, and she suffocated. So
Wow.
Yeah, he was a very powerful man, big African American dude, and multiple people say that he had like hollow eyes, that he just had it didn't look like he had a soul, and that he was completely evil. It was the face of evil, the face of the devil, right? He's got these long lines down his cheeks, like he's just been, I don't know, like stressed or just
scowling his whole life.
His soul was beaten like his whole life. Like it just looks done and tired and just, it's creepy. You know what I mean?
All right.
So he's constantly getting in trouble with this kind of stuff. And then we fast forward a year. He's only 13 years old, and he comes down with a serious case of bacterial meningitis, which is no walk in the park. You know what I mean, right? They call it the screaming meningitis. I'm serious. Ask a doctor. My dad's a doctor, right? So he told me about this. Extremely painful, extremely high fever, and often times brain damage occurs, right? Especially back then, you know, and obviously it's not as treatable as it is today. It's still just antibiotics if it's bacterial. But
so it's just a fever that causes the damage.
Right, brain damage.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, to the point of, I mean, you'll be having seizures, and, you know, he had it really bad. Obviously, he survived, but I wonder what part that played in affecting the chemistry of his brain, you know? I wonder if that ultimately was what a factor in turning him into this monster, you know? And I've tried to do research, but I'm not a doctor. I'm like, oh, it's just like these Latin words. I don't understand. I'm a smart guy, but I don't understand all of that. I have no idea how to make that connection. It'd be interesting if we had a listener who was a little bit more medically trained that could answer something like that, you know?
Well, if it damaged his frontal lobe, I believe that's where your like impulse control center is, and your ability to make decisions and things like that. So it could have definitely.
He couldn't smell anymore.
Oh yeah?
No, I made that up.
Oh.
But I would believe it. I would believe it.
My grandma can't smell, so.
Really?
Yep.
Okay, well, now I'm interested. I mean, what's going on with that?
She got sick as a kid, I guess, and lost her sense of smell.
Dang.
Yeah.
It would be it'd be beneficial for changing diapers, I guess, but other than that, no.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. That's a real thing, huh?
Yeah.
Damn. Yeah, that's tough. Can she taste? Aren't those connected?
Yeah, she can, I believe. I think I've asked her before, but I can't tell you how many Christmases I forgot and got her perfume for Christmas. Or I was like, oh shit! Well, here you get to smell good for other people.
It ain't for you, you selfish woman. Jesus Christ, chill.
Whoops, or candles, you know?
I know.
Here, have this.
Here, have a little bundle of warmth and light. I mean, that's 2 of the 3. So that's what
It's like, here's a fire hazard that you can't even smell.
I have a firm belief that candles are very important in the event of a power outage. You can ask anyone. I think.
You know, or
should have
flashlights.
I mean, okay. If you got batteries on deck. What about that chlorine gas spill, though? And your batteries are corroded. Candles don't corrode. I mean, I don't know. I guess the wrong gas, it would explode.
A plume of fumes would probably not be so recommended around an open flame.
Fine. Let's get back to what I'm talking about here. Bacterial meningitis and serial killers. Okay. So
I'm with you.
No, so he was only 13 years old, and he gets bacterial meningitis. He gets super aggressive afterwards. Not to know that it's connected, but it does happen. He winds up taking a paper route, and at the time he's 15 years old, and I think this is his first arrest.
So he's like a strong, angry paper boy.
He's like a strong, angry.
Is he like throwing
dumb
papers onto the roofs?
Paper boy.
Backyards.
No, so even worse, this is what he did, and he was completely ballsy. He was just so brazen. This is what he did. He knocks on the door, right?
Lack of impulse control.
Right, and you're about to see a prime example of that. So the dude knocks on the door, and a lady opens the door, and he beats the shit out of her instantly. It was on his paper route. He gets arrested, obviously, and they're like, what happened? And he was like, I just felt like beating somebody up. I mean, that was his whole thing. And they were like, okay. So they realized something was a little off, and they sent him in to a mental institution, basically. He was there for 4.5 months. And they determined that he was mildly mentally retarded, and he had an IQ of 75. But they said he could mask it and hide it to appear intelligent, even though he was not. So, I mean...
I think I know people like that.
Really?
Probably.
I mean, I don't know. This is going over my head. I'm just kidding. I think it's interesting, though, to say the least, that this guy was just like capable of so much without having much mental capacity, it seems. And it was just so, like you said, lack of impulse control and the way he attacked these people. So
isn't that something that isn't meningitis, doesn't have a vaccine? It seems
it's treated
odd.
with antibiotics.
Well, I mean,
bacterial. There's also a viral one, which obviously antibiotics don't work on. So I'm not really sure what they do for that. Prayers and wishes, I don't know. I don't know. So we'll fast forward a little bit more, and he's still in Michigan at this time, right? And it's not until 1980. Remember, this is all in 1974, right? It's not until 1980 that a connection is really made. In 1975, he was questioned for a murder, but they were like, nah, I don't know, it might not be him. They didn't have enough evidence, and they just released him. But they kind of had the name in the back of their minds at that point. But it's not until 1980 that they really start figuring things out and connecting the dots. And so what happens then is you have these bodies turning up, and it's pretty quick. It's within a couple weeks of each other to a month or so of each other. And they're showing up with the exact same MO, right? So they've all been stabbed like 50 times. One was like 33 times. One was like 50 times. And it's they're being strangled and drowned. So in the bathtub, they're being drowned in the bathtub. So they're like, okay, there's obviously a connection here, right? So in May 1980, they really start questioning stuff because he gets divorced after only being married for 6 months, right?
Right.
He's married to this girl for 6 months. They actually have a daughter, Nikisha Watts. I tried to find this person on social media, but there's 100,000 of them, of course. So I don't know who it is. Well, so the wife says she wanted to get divorced, and she made it very clear that she left him. And the reason was because after they had sex, he would immediately leave the house for hours. And it's like, okay, well, I think we figured out what he was doing.
Not much of a cuddler.
Not much. Jesus Christ. Not at all. Not at all, as he will later admit to. And so she thought that was very strange, and his behavior was very strange in general. And so
he said, fork spooning. I'm getting the hell out of here.
We need one of those drum sound effects for you, because I don't want to go da-doom every single time, but it's fantastic. I love it. So here's the problem. These bodies are turning up in Ann Arbor. He lives in Detroit. So anyone from that area, it's 45 minutes away to the west, maybe an hour. I don't remember exactly. It was somewhere between 30 minutes and an hour away, and I was in Ann Arbor. It's 50 miles. So it wasn't out of the question by any means, but they had to tie it together somehow. And they were like, this guy is in the back of our minds. It might be this dude, but we can't connect him. Until one night, there is a general just patrol officer who's looking for this kid this guy's been running around cutting parking meters off in half, like the heads off of them. He's cutting parking meters. And we're going to find this damn vandal kid. So a cop's just sitting there on the side of the road, and this girl's walking home. It's 4:30 in the morning. She's by herself. And he notices a car following her. And this is in Ann Arbor, by the way. And the car's following her. And it's super obvious. He pulls up next to her, stops, pulls up another block as she walks away, stops again. I think she crossed the street. He makes a U-turn, comes back, stops again. And it's super obvious. The cop runs the plates. And I'm thinking to myself, is this guy in a police car? Does this guy not see the police car? What's, you know what I mean? Runs the plates, comes back, Corll Eugene Watts. And they're like, oh, this is the guy. We've made a connection. He's on a suspect list. So it's like, hey, watch out if you happen to run across this guy. And they're like, that's him. They arrest him. They take him in. But they don't have anything against him, really, right, at this point. So let me take a break.
There's no evidence of a crime.
Right. So there's no evidence of a crime at this point. So it's very difficult
to hold him on anything.
Yeah, exactly. But at the same time, they know it's him now. They found wood carving tools in his car that matched the stab wounds perfectly. However, they're perfectly clean. You know what I mean? But they knew it was him at this point. He's in Ann Arbor. It's this dude. A detective in Detroit had actually called, or I think it was a detective in Ann Arbor had called, was in contact with the detective in Detroit. And they were feeding each other information. And they were like, okay, this matches up. This is the right guy. And then they gather enough information to, it's kind of they get a search warrant for his car, and they found the wood tools, and they didn't have enough to arrest him, but they started surveilling him. So they put a little tracker on his car, seriously, like the FBI, but nothing happened. I think he knew that he was a suspect, and so nothing happened. Bodies stopped. He was just going to work, going home. And then because of that, they eventually dialed back surveillance or whatever.
Well, it costs a lot of money to surveil somebody, so I'm sure that they probably...
Yeah, and there's also, at this time in Detroit, there's, I don't know the exact number. I know in Houston at the time there were 700 murders a year. So I know they didn't have the time and resources to solely focus on this guy. So once that stopped, we have a major, major incident. And this is kind of where it comes down to. It's May 23rd, 1982, in Houston, Texas. So after they stopped surveilling him, he disappeared, right? Shows up in Houston, and through the network of detectives that are talking, somehow word gets back to Michigan. That detective calls a detective in Houston and says, "You guys got to watch out. This guy's on the loose down there. He disappeared from our sites up here. He's reappeared down there. He's not going to stop. No way. He's a killer. We can't prove it, but it's him for sure. He's wanted in he's the prime suspect in at least 3 murders up here, and possibly a lot more, right?" So May 23rd, 1982. It's an apartment complex in South Houston, Texas. And there are 2 female roommates, Lori Lister and Melinda Aguilar. I think just, in their mid-20s or whatever, 25, 30 years old. And I was watching a documentary. I saw this apartment itself. I'll try to describe it. It was basically a very small apartment, like a very small patio with some stairs right next to it. And then there's like a big tree covering it. So he has kind of some cover. And apparently, one of the girls is walking home to her apartment. And this guy just comes out, grabs her by the neck, pulls her back into kind of the covered area, and just starts choking her. And there's a bit of a scuffle, obviously. Now the girl's roommate's also home, so she comes out of the door, and she's like, "Oh, holy crap!" And so he freaks out. He runs, and by this time the first girl was unconscious, so he runs upstairs, immediately attacks that girl, and is like, "I'm going to kill you," and starts strangling her, right, with a knife to her throat, by the way. So she goes, "All right, well, I'm going to play dead because he's about to kill me." And so
this would be a perfect time for that other girl to come back to consciousness.
Right, she didn't, unfortunately. So, but it works out in an interesting way. So he winds up tying that girl up upstairs, ties her to the bed, and then goes outside again. No witnesses, by the way. This is some crazy stuff happening in an apartment complex. Drags the unconscious girl back up the stairs and starts filling the bathtub in order to drown her. Now, at this time, the other roommate is able to escape. And literally, she's partially able to escape. I think she's still bound together, but she's untied from the bed. And she literally dives out of the freaking window from the second story. And at that point, a neighbor hears, "She's trying to kill my roommate. She's trying to kill my roommate." And Corll, "Hey, I'm Corll. I'm here to kill you." Dips. He darts out and he's sprinting away from the apartment complex. Police are en route and they see this dude, like sweaty, running from the crime basically, and they catch him. "Hey, what's your name?" "Hi, I'm Corll." Got him.
What
you know what I mean?
Hanging out.
Yeah. And so they got him. They now have caught the guy. Both of the girls are survived, right? Both of the girls have survived, and they have a witness, and I mean, it's the perfect situation, right? So here's what happens: the detectives in Houston say, we have all these matching killings in our jurisdiction that we believe you did. We will grant you immunity, so you will not be charged with the murders if you confess to them. And he was like, "Okay, sounds good." They said, "But we will charge you with burglary and attempted murder." So it's burglary with intent to commit murder on these 2 girls, right?
Right.
And that's all we're going to charge you with. Carried a term of 60 years in prison. So he said, fine. He agreed to it. And at this point, he freaking confesses to everything in Houston. He's like, "Yeah, I killed at least..." Immediately, he confesses to 13 killings. And it's on point. He's like, "This is where the bodies are. I can take you there." He showed him a couple of them. He's like, "Oh, this is back in the bayou. I buried her over here." And it was super cooperative. And
he strikes me as the type that would just only care about numbers. Like, he wants to kill as many as possible. He doesn't care who they were.
Yeah.
A lot of killers, they know the names of their victims and, details about them. He seems like he's just kind of like a killer of opportunity. Like anytime he sees somebody that he thinks he can get away with killing, he goes for him.
Right. And so at this point, he starts explaining that kind of stuff as he's in custody. And they're like, well, how did you do it? And he tells them, he's like, well, I was driving. I saw a girl. I jumped out of the car. I strangled her. I stabbed her 50 times. I got back in the car and I went home. Like, that's it. Like, he had no... there was no premeditated anything. It was just all in the heat of the moment. He jumped out, stabbed somebody.
Story.
Crime of passion, yeah. But it took him so long to get caught. Now, it's 1982. Everybody's happy that he's caught, right? He gets 60 years in prison very quickly.
Bet money he doesn't spend 60 years in prison.
He does not. And this is what makes this story absolutely nuts. So... he's a convicted serial killer at this point. I mean, he's admitted to being a serial killer. He's convicted just on the other charge, but he's admitted to being a serial killer. And he goes to prison in Huntsville, which we all know that's where death row is here in Texas. Obviously, he's not on death row because of his immunity, but he's doing his 60 years there. And as he's in his cell, he gains some smarts and he looks into his case and he realizes...
He underped?
He underped.
Oh, shit.
Isn't this interesting, right? So a man with an IQ of 75, apparently, looks into his case and he says, I was never informed that the water in the bathtub is considered a lethal weapon. And it's basically declared a mistrial almost. So the charge is downgraded from burglary with intent to commit murder to just burglary. He's reclassified as a nonviolent felon and then is eligible for early release after 24 years in 2006. This is all going down in like 2002, 2003.
But he knows that a knife is a murder weapon, so, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter if it's a mistrial.
Right. So, so basically, he's about to get out of prison. He's a very good prisoner. He's getting out for good behavior in 2006, in May of 2006, and people are absolutely appalled. This would be the first serial killer in world history to ever be released from prison, or at least American history. I don't know about world history. There's some crazy shit that happens in Russia, but you know what I mean?
Russia scares the shit out of me.
So, you know, but the first one in America, and so people are losing their minds. The families have formed websites. I even looked at a couple of them. They're still up, and they're like, how are we gonna deal with this? And Texas is like, there's nothing we can do. It's the mandatory release law, which the activist groups actually successfully abolished. However, it didn't apply. You know, he was basically grandfathered in. It didn't apply to
set the precedent.
Previous cases, right? So Michigan gets a hold of this guy getting caught, right? And at a similar time, the district attorney over there in the area reopens these cases and says, we believe that this is the guy who did it. If anybody has any information, please come forward. And there's a guy by the name of, I think, Joe Foy, came forward. And he was like, yes, I tried to tell the cops years ago. I saw this guy directly in my line of sight commit a murder, one of the murders that you guys are questioning us about. And so her name is Helen Dutch. She was one of the first ones back in Michigan. And he says, yeah, I told the police about it, and they said, don't worry about it. He's in Texas. He's already in prison. Just put it to bed. And now that he's getting out, I mean, everyone's freaking out. And so eventually, after he contacts the DA, the DA's like, all right, we'll bring him on in. And almost immediately, they convict this guy of the 3 murders. He gets 2 back-to-back life sentences. So he is then transferred to Michigan to serve the rest of his time. And it's only 4 months later, after getting sentenced to that, he dies from prostate cancer in prison.
Shame.
I know. So
I wish it hurt. I hope it hurt.
But that's how it went down. I think the craziest thing to me is that number one, it was somebody who just acted on pure passion. He got out. He stabbed people with wood tools. He didn't care where he was. He always did it on a Sunday morning, right? The Sunday morning slasher, the paper called him. He always did it very early in the morning on Sundays. That was like his thing. I don't know if he went to church afterwards.
I was about to say.
You know what I mean? Because I might want to, clear my conscience after something like that in a shower. But he did that, and he would jump out. He didn't care where he was. He didn't care what city he was in. and he would violently attack people and just carry on with his life. And he was in prison saying, he said, "Oh, well, I've easily killed over 40, but I have at least 80 to 90 victims, you know." Other than that one person, nobody could really identify him, but that one person's story was able to put him behind bars for 2 consecutive life sentences and ensure that he passed away there. So
what was his story exactly? I mean,
so
what did he tell the police?
Yeah, so he goes, he was like, it's very simple. I was on my back porch, and maybe 80 yards away or 50 yards away, not even, you know, it was across the parking lot, basically, in the adjacent parking lot, I believe. He said, I saw a man and a woman, what looked like they were arguing, and he raised up a hand above his shoulder and in a slashing motion brought it down across her body. He couldn't see a weapon, but he did say that her body fell immediately after he saw that slashing motion. At that point, the guy, and he, you know, obviously didn't know each other, so he walked to his car to leaving her body there, and then turned and looked at Joe, this guy on the porch, and they made eye contact from like across the parking lot. They were just staring at each other. And he said it was like looking into the eyes of the devil. And it was, he just saw this blank face. And he was a little far away, but he said it was this blank face that he would never forget. And it was like pure evil. So that's kind of how that story went down. He was absolutely sure that that was him.
My ass is staying in a fucking Holiday Inn that night. Not today, Satan.
Not today. So that's ultimately what did him in. But I think the most interesting things about this is that he was able to do it for so long without getting caught. He was
not particularly careful either.
Not particularly careful at all. And not only that, but he was almost released from prison. I mean, he was almost let go. He was like, I've killed, you know, at least 40 people. And they were like, all right, well, you've been good. So,
you didn't know that you could drown somebody in water. We can't really hold that against you.
Seriously. Oh, man, it's pretty amazing.
Yeah, so he's dead.
He is dead. He died in 2007.
Another one bites the dust.
Another one bites the dust just a few months after he was convicted. And I wonder, if he had this hope of like getting out and killing again, and then that was immediately crushed, and like the stress of it like brought upon cancer. You know what I mean?
I hope.
It seems like that might have happened for sure. But ultimately, he just ran around and he murked everyone. He didn't care. They're mostly white girls, but it was always females. Party. But yeah, he was just doing his thing, didn't care. Face of pure evil, and that's Carl Eugene Watts, or Corll.
Corll.
And another thing, every documentary I watched, every person that talked about him referred to him as Corll, and I think it's just a lot of this is like the Houston accent. You know what I mean? Or detectives looked up stuff there, and I don't know. I guess Michigan wouldn't say that, but they do. Corll.
Corll.
That's obviously Corll.
Somebody set a precedent at some point.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, I guess it's Corll and not Carl.
I know. Maybe that's just how he talked. You know what I mean?
I guess.
Corll from Cologne.
Yeah, maybe that's how he introduced himself.
You know? All right. So let's transition to your guy. Another Corll, except this was his last name, and it's not spelled like Finding Nemo.
Dean Corll.
Famous.
This guy was a piece of work. And when I say guy, I mean piece of shit. And when I say work, I mean shit. So this piece of shit was shit.
I've heard of his name several times, and I know that he's one of the more famous guys that we've talked about so far.
Yeah.
Well, out of all three of them, you know.
Well, there's a shit ton of information on him, first of all. And wouldn't you know that after hours of research and typing out this information, it somehow disappeared from my computer and I had to start over.
It's the ghost of
Pretty
Dean
much.
Corll.
Yeah, piece of shit. So, Dean Corll. What to say about him? He was known as the Pied Piper and the Candyman. Now, this is going to be a messy-ass patchwork of information.
Okay.
I'm going to tell as much as I know that's in my mind by heart, and I have stuff written down, so this is going to be a journey for us all.
Okay.
So, okay. He was known as the Candyman and also known as the Pied Piper. He was born on Christmas Eve of 1939.
No kidding. Christmas Eve, huh?
Yeah, Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas, bitches.
That's terrible.
It's like Santa or something.
Oh my gosh. Couldn't go much worse than that.
And actually, his crimes were only committed, as far as I know, over a span of 3 years.
Really? 3 years?
3 years.
I thought this guy was like 20-year veteran, you know what I mean? Like he was going to retire with a pension from the murder industry. Like,
no, he was a busy motherfucker.
Damn.
Busy boy, Dean Corll. He was born in Houston, Texas.
Represent.
As far as I could find.
H-Town. Throw it down.
And one of the interesting things about Dean Corll and the reason he had so many victims and he was so successful is that he actually recruited 2 teenage boys to be his accomplices.
Yep.
I will never know how people can commit these crimes together. How do you even approach the subject with somebody? Hey, so how do you feel about,
You know what we should do, Jill? I think I could approach it. I could definitely. I'm a good speaker. Not that you guys would know, because I'm so new to this podcast thing. But hey, you know what would be really interesting is if we murdered. No, that doesn't really work.
Have you ever wondered what it felt like to crush somebody's windpipe? What do you think that would feel like?
That's pretty good. That's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't know. You would have to find somebody that's obviously like interested. Like, I don't know, the dark web.
I guess. I mean, in this case,
markyourneighbor.com.
Yeah. In this case, I think the reason he was able to do it is because these 2 boys that he recruited were intended victims.
Oh, really?
And he just kind of saw some potential in them that he thought maybe he could put them to work.
Yeah.
And he did. I mean, they are as guilty from what I've read as he is.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't just cover up or help him dispose of bodies. They were very involved in the whole process.
So it's not like they were like, oh, I was under duress and I had to.
No, and
otherwise he would whip me or something like that.
Right. And actually, one of them in particular, actually both of them at different times, I guess, their true nature came out and they were just as vile and evil and brutal as he was.
It makes you wonder if, what if he just rubbed off on them or if they were already. It's kind of like that meme you posted. We had this like poll on our Facebook page whether or not you believe, and go on there and check it out, whether or not you believe serial killers are made this way or born this way. So
yeah, you can find us at the
Grave
Matter podcast on Facebook. So anyway, I think maybe that's what he saw in them. Mm-hmm. He saw the potential that they could.
You guys would make outstanding killers. You know that, right? I mean, he's like, I was going to kill you, but
I think I might keep you around a
let's
little
go grab
while.
a burger and talk about a few things.
Yeah. All right, let's see. So David Owen Brooks and Elmer Wayne Henley Jr. were his accomplices. That's their names. And they'll come up later on. But because of the shitty-ass manner of which I ordered this.
No, it's totally fine. I know who you're talking about somewhat because, I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but I knew and worked with somebody that was related to one of those 2 guys. So we'll talk about that when they come up a little bit later. So there's no spoiler alerts, but it's very, very interesting. How old were they? Did you say how old they were at the time? I mean, they were young. They were like teenagers, right? Like
14, 15.
Wow. Okay.
16 maybe. Yeah,
okay.
Somewhere like that. They weren't older teens. They were
moldable.
Yeah. Well, actually, he met and befriended Brooks when Brooks was only 12 years old. Wow. Yeah. So, which is David Owen Brooks, his first accomplice. He didn't bring on both of them at the same time. He actually had.
Oh, really? Okay.
Dean as his accomplice for a while before Henley even entered the picture.
I thought they were like friends and then got them together. Okay.
No.
Very interesting.
Yeah. So
the more you know.
Yeah. This guy Dean, he was like living the pedophile's dream. He was honorably discharged from the army, and after that he came home and resumed his role as vice president of his family's candy company, which is where he got the nickname the Candy Man.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Creepy.
This candy company happened to be located across the street from an elementary school. Dean would wave kids over after they got out of school and give them samples of candy or, stuff they couldn't sell or whatever, just to kind of be a presence in their life. You know what I mean, kind of
Yeah.
thing. Dean was known to flirt with young male employees of the company, and he even went as far as to put like a pool table in the back of the company, like a little hangout for teenagers to congregate and spend time. So
Wow.
these kids that grew up in elementary school and spent afternoons over there, once they got a little older, they still, made their way over there just to hang out with Dean and all the other boys, you know. This guy, pretty much from what I've heard, he really surrounded himself with teenage boys all the time.
That's scary. You would think that like a company, like a big company, would be like a legit operation. Like, I don't know. That's really creepy.
Yeah, it was really creepy.
It's like he's scoping the scene, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think I even heard once that he went on a date with a woman, and he showed up on the date in his van with several teenage boys with him to accompany him on this date. That's how, I mean, he took them, I think David Brooks, they often went to the coast for the weekend, which makes me wonder where the hell his parents were. I mean, I can't imagine sending my young son.
Can I go to the beach with the candy man?
Yeah, right.
Fuck it.
So,
Sounds good to me.
So in 1967, that's when Dean and Brooks became friends, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
They spent more and more time together, and Brooks began to see Corll as a father figure. It wasn't long after that, though, that Dean Corll had coerced David to enter into a sexual relationship with him.
No kidding.
Yeah.
Wow.
At 12 years old. He even paid him in cash and gift so that David would allow Dean to perform sexual acts on him. Like he bribed him for this. They went on trips, long trips to the coast together. And when David's parents divorced, he went to live with his mother in Beaumont. David would come to visit his father and make a point to go to Corll's apartment and hang out with him, spend time with him. Later in that same year, David moved back to Houston, and by his own admission, he started regarding Corll's apartment as like his second home. Eventually, the candy company closed its doors permanently. This happened in June of '68. Dean's mother and half-sister moved to Colorado, and he never saw them in person again.
Wow.
Yeah. After the company shut down, Dean found work as an electrician. He would test like electrical relay systems.
That's pretty nuts. What a difference, huh?
Yeah, and he did that up until his death. That was his career for the rest of his life. Sorry.
All good.
So the way that Dean, I'm going to go ahead and say right now, this is a long story, so it may pick up at the beginning of next week's episode. So if I
It's just a ton of info, right? I mean,
I've got 6 pages of information, and that's not what I have in my head either. So
no, it's all good.
So we
the
wanna
more
know.
the merrier. Let's learn about these freaks.
Yeah, we want to know how it wraps up. I mean, you don't want to get all the way through it and not have any payoff. So
Yes, ma'am.
So most of Corll's victims were lured and abducted from Houston Heights, which is like a low-income suburb near Houston. The majority of his victims were also taken with the assistance of one or both of his accomplices. And most of his victims were actually friends with one or both of his accomplices. Like they invited as a friend, hey, why don't you come over here to Dean's house and hang out? And so they basically trapped them.
They trapped their own friends.
Right, exactly. They were lured to Dean's vehicle with the enticement of maybe a ride. He'd say, hey, you need a lift, or whatever. Or they would say, hey, we're having a party, why don't you come on? There's weed and, we're going to drink, whatever.
Yeah.
And usually what would happen is they'd take them to the home and they'd be plied with liquor and drugs, and then they would party.
That part was real.
Yeah. And then they would pass out, and he would tie them up, or he would trick them into handcuffing themselves, or he would just take them by brute force and just, tackle them down and tie them up.
Wow.
After he rendered them helpless, he would tie these boys to his bed, or he had like a plywood board that he had made as like a torture table.
Jeez.
Where he would secure them to the board.
It's pretty much what we're recording on, but that's
right.
That's okay. That's not scary at all.
So he would, after he got them secured, he would sexually assault them, torture, beat them, sometimes for several days before he would kill them.
No kidding. Jeez, that's unreal.
Yeah, and
with the assistance of
two
their
other
friends.
Yeah, that boggles my mind.
That boggles my mind too. They're the same age. They're friends with each other, and they're like, "Yeah, this is fine."
Yeah.
You know.
Yep. So
it makes you wonder.
Yeah, it does. So he basically, usually they were killed by strangulation, manual strangulation with the hands, or a .22 caliber pistol shot to the head. And then one of his favorite places to bury his victims was a small boat shed that he rented on some other property. So they would move the bodies there and dig a hole and bury them. He also buried some of his victims at a beach on the Bolivar Peninsula in Jefferson County, or a wooded area near Lake Sam Rayburn.
I think I've heard of that before.
Yeah, he
Rayburn. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, he had 3 spots.
Definitely heard of the beach.
The boat shed, the beach, or the wooded area next to the lake.
That's absolutely terrifying.
Yeah. In a lot of cases, he would force his victims to write letters to their parents to kind of explain their absence so that he would buy him time before anybody started really looking for them seriously.
Wow.
Yeah, so...
Like, hey, I ran away, I don't want to be here. Like,
exactly. Wow. And so he would, the parents of the boy would be like, not worried that he was taken, but it would buy him a little time. And if they went to the police with it, he clearly ran away, so, He kept a lot of souvenirs of his crimes. Mostly the souvenirs he kept were keys, like their house keys or whatever, or their car keys. Wow. Or
that's some pretty direct evidence. I mean,
and I don't know why he would choose keys like that's. Can you think of anything more aggravating to have piles of around your house? Like, I gotta go to the mailbox. Oh shit!
Right. Maybe he had a fond memory of a strong memory of what each one was. I don't know.
It just seems aggravating to collect keys that.
I think it was amazing.
I guess it's better than teeth or something, but still. Yeah,
that's what I was, like fingernails or something crazy,
Yeah.
But I was hoping it wasn't that. Yeah, that's gross. Yeah. I guess keys will work.
Yeah. Well,
I know my guy, Corll Watts, and he remembered almost everything about all of the murders that he committed, other than what clothing they were wearing.
Huh.
But he was like, he knew everything, almost a lot of their names, and he was like, this is where.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. Which I thought was pretty crazy. Maybe he saw it on the news afterwards. I know he didn't have time to catch everybody's name as he was, hey, what's your as he's stabbing him. Right?
I like your sound effect.
I'm Corll. I know, right? Yeah, it probably sounds like something else. I'm sorry.
So Dean's first victim that we know of was an 18-year-old college freshman named Jeffrey Conan. So Conan disappeared on September 25th of 1970. He was hitchhiking with another student from UT, actually.
No kidding.
To his parents' home in Houston. His cause of death was manual strangulation. He had a cloth gag placed in his mouth, and his naked body was buried beneath a large boulder covered in a layer of lime, wrapped in plastic, and bound hand and foot, suggesting he had been violated. David Brooks, one of the accomplices, actually led the police to that body on August 10th of 1973. So near the time of that particular murdy?
You got murdered. That's ridiculous.
Near the time of that murder, David Brooks actually showed up at Corll's apartment and interrupted him in the act of sexually assaulting 2 teenage boys who he had strapped to his bed. And Corll negotiated basically with David. He said, if you keep your mouth shut, don't tell anybody about this, I'll make it worth your time. And he agreed to buy him a car.
Wow.
In order for him to keep his mouth shut. So he kept good on that promise. He actually handed David the keys to a green Corvette he purchased for him.
He bought him a Corvette?
He bought him a Corvette. And so, of course...
I can't even imagine driving that thing with a guilty conscience like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no kidding. Well, that was enough for David to realize that Corll meant business. So he was like, they struck up a deal. And Dean actually told him, for any boy that you can bring me to my apartment so that I can do what I do, I'll give you $200 per head. And he agreed. So on December 13th of 1970, David Brooks lured 2 14-year-old youths named James Glass and Danny Yates back to Dean Corll's apartment. They were tied to opposite sides of Corll's torture board and subsequently raped, strangled, and buried in the boat shed that Corll had rented. 6 weeks later, Brooks and Corll encountered 2 teenage brothers, Donald and Jerry walking home from a friend's house, they were also raped, tortured, strangled, and buried in the boat shed.
Wow.
I see a theme.
Do you know how many bodies they found in that boat shed?
Yeah, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 17, I think.
Jesus Christ.
And it was not, I mean, it was big enough to park a boat. And there was even a point in time where 2 of his victims were actually buried literally on top of James Glass and Danny Yates. He buried them, and then when he came back later to bury some other victims later on, he was out of room, and so he started over and he just started layering them. You know what I mean?
That's unreal.
Yeah, so there was a big number, and I've heard reports from people that were actually involved in the discovery of the bodies, and how horrible it was to be in Houston, Texas, digging up decomposing bodies of teenage boys, people puking everywhere, and couldn't, it's hot and stinks.
And they're
awful,
everywhere.
And they just keep finding more and more and more and more. So that sounds like probably one of my worst nightmares. Mm-hmm. That's your job. You have to stay,
Yeah.
I mean.
No way. Not for me.
No, I'm good.
We'll talk about it on a podcast, though.
I'll just I'll continue to sit here in my comfy chair and talk shit.
Yep,
for
that's
a living. That'll be good. So after the Waldrop brothers, between March and May of 1971, Dean Corll abducted and killed 3 victims, all of whom were buried towards the rear of the boat shed. Brooks was involved in all 3 of these murders. Randall Harvey was taken. This is one of the 3. He was taken while riding his bike to work. He was a gas station attendant. He was killed by a single gunshot wound to the head. The other 2 victims, David Hildegeist, 13, and 16-year-old Gregory Malley Winkle, were abducted and killed together on the afternoon of May 29th of 1972.
Jeez.
So this gets kind of interesting right here. The parents of those missing boys were frantic to find their children, obviously.
Yeah.
And one of the first volunteers to offer to help pass out flyers was Elmer Wayne Henley, the second accomplice. This is before he knew Dean Corll or anything that was going on.
So it's before he was an accomplice.
Right. Yeah. He had no,
Wow.
he was just...
Jesus.
He was a lifelong friend of David Hildegeist, one of the boys that went missing.
Yeah.
He actually spent time with his parents and assured them there must be some kind of innocent, explanation for his whereabouts. Like, I can't think that anything bad happened to him. And he passed out flyers and hung up flyers all over town and in their neighborhood trying to help find him. And he insisted to the parents of David Hildegeist that there must be a reasonable explanation for his absence.
Interesting.
And,
Wow, that's crazy. So
Yeah.
that was his introduction to Corll, was basically passing out the flyers, huh?
Yeah, he had no idea who he was at that time. On August 17th of 1971, Corll and Brooks encountered a 17-year-old acquaintance of Brooks, Reuben Watson Haney. Reuben was walking home from the movies, and Brooks persuaded Haney to accompany them to a party. Haney agreed and was subsequently strangled and buried in the boat shed.
That's what happens.
As will happen.
Yeah. Seems like the trend.
Yeah, not a good one.
It's crazy. They just keep doing it the same way every single time, too.
Yeah.
Tie him
and
up,
getting away with
rape
it.
him, strangle him, wrap him up, put him in the boat shed.
Yep. In September of 1971, Corll moved to another apartment in the Heights. David Brooks later stated that he had assisted Corll in the abduction and murder of 2 teens during that time while Corll lived in that particular home, including one youth who was kept alive for 4 days and killed right before Elmer Wayne Henley joined the picture. Neither of those boys were ever identified. Nobody knows who they were.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Jeez, that's terrible.
Yeah. In the winter of 1971, Brooks introduced Elmer Wayne Henley to Dean Corll. It's more than likely that Henley was meant to be a victim, but for some unknown reason, Corll decided to take him on as a second accomplice. He offered him the same deal he gave Brooks, $200 per boy. Corll told Henley that he was involved in like a slavery ring.
Interesting.
And that's why he was collecting these boys. And for several months, I mean, like, as if that's better.
I know. I'm thinking the same thing. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, it's just a slavery ring. Like, so for several months, Henley ignored Corll's offers to work for him. But one day he decided he could no longer turn down that kind of money. His family was like in extreme dire straits financially. So he contacted Dean and said, all right, I'll do it. And his first abduction, the first abduction that Henley participated in, was of a teen that the pair picked up while they were driving around together. They offered to take him back to their place so the three of them could smoke weed together. The teen agreed, and while at the residence, he was tricked into putting on a pair of handcuffs. According to Henley, after the boy was cuffed, he left the apartment and left Corll and the teen alone together, claiming that he didn't know that what Corll's intentions were.
Yeah.
He didn't know that he was going to abuse, rape, and kill him. He just thought he was going to sell him into slavery.
Jesus.
The identity of this boy is not certain. They found his body. They found the body of 17-year-old Willard Branch, and they believe that that's who it was. They're not positive, but he fits the description and the timeline of when he was taken.
Interesting.
Yeah. A month later, now this all happened in a 3-year span.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like...
Yeah, it's happening super fast. It's
right.
like this guy's just one and then another and then another. It became an everyday thing to him. He's like, yeah, just
I need
give
a
me
new boy.
$200. It's like recycling metal or something. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, that's a lot of money. But on top of it, I actually read somewhere that the accomplices, Henley and Brooks, they could tell when he was about ready to ask them to bring another boy, because he would get like kind of aggressive and super antsy, and he would like make really like sharp movements, and like he just seemed like he was about to snap, you know what I mean? And then he would be like, all right, I think it's time for a new boy, like bring a new boy, you know? So
just unable to control his own. Yeah.
Right. It's bizarre and scary, actually.
Yeah, it is.
I don't believe that if I couldn't find, if I was in their position and I couldn't find one, I wouldn't be going back. That's for damn sure.
Yeah.
I'm not showing up empty-handed. I'm his type. I don't think so.
Yeah, you're not kidding. That would be absolutely terrifying.
Yeah, like, oh, you'll do. I think not.
Yeah.
So a month later, on March 24th of 72, the trio, all three of them together, encountered an acquaintance of Henley's named...
The Three Musketeers.
Yeah. Named Frank Aguirre, not sure. As he was walking home from a restaurant that he worked at, Henley motioned to Frank to come over to Corll's van, and they invited him to come to Corll's house and drink and smoke together. So after smoking and drinking, Corll overpowered the teen by surprise. He forced him into handcuffs. Henley claimed that he had no knowledge of Corll's intentions yet again. He didn't expect that Frank would be killed, and he later claimed that he tried to talk Dean out of it. He says that Dean refused and told Henley, this is the same shit that happened to the other boys you brought, so I'm not stopping now. And that's when he supposedly found out that the true fate of these boys that he was bringing, which didn't stop him from still fucking helping him, so
yeah.
Doesn't matter.
It makes you wonder what he thought at that point, Was he just too... Was he like, man, I'm too deep, like they're going to kill me? Or like you said, I'm his type.
Right, yeah, exactly.
I don't know.
So...
It's a rude awakening for sure.
Definitely.
I thought there was just a slavery ring.
What are you doing, man? Are you mad?
Oh, man. Should have just told him the truth from the get-go.
Right. So Henley explained to Henley that that's the same fate that the others, saw, and that he was determined to do the same to Frank. Ultimately, Henley helped Brooks and Corll bury Frank at High Island Beach.
Wow. He was out of room in the boat shed at this time, I guess.
No, because he still used the boat shed here and there. I think it's probably, he moved so much, it was probably just whatever was closest to where he was living at the time.
Interesting.
Can't really be driving all over the place with bodies and corpses in your car, I guess. I don't
know. Sometimes I wonder,
Yeah, it's amazing. So despite Henley now knowing for a fact what was happening to these boys he was acquiring, he was still an active participant in the following abductions and murders committed by Corll. Within a month, on April 20th of 1972, Henley assisted Corll and Brooks in the abduction of another youth, a 17-year-old named Mark Scott. Scott was well known to both Henley and Brooks. He was grabbed by force, but fought furiously against Corll's attempts to restrain him. Mm-hmm. He even tried to...
Well, yeah, I wouldn't... Yeah. I mean, I would.
He tried to stab them with a knife. He was fighting like hell.
The victim stabbed them?
The victim was trying to stab him with a knife he had on him, like a pocket knife, I guess. And And during the struggle, he glanced over at Henley and saw that Henley had a gun pointed at him, and he just gave up. He just stopped fighting. He just resolved himself to what was happening. Brooks claimed that Scott just gave up, and he met the same fate as Frank, tortured, raped, and strangled. He was buried in High Island Beach. Brooks stated that Henley was especially sadistic. So Henley, the second accomplice, is starting
the one that didn't know any better.
Right, the one that thought it was just a slave ring was especially sadistic in his participation of these next murders committed at Schuler Street, which is the next place that Corll lived. Before leaving that address, the three abducted and murdered two youths named Billy Balch and Johnny Delhomme. After the boys' torture and rapes, Henley reportedly manually strangled Billy before shouting, "Hey, Johnny," and then shot Delhomme in the head with a bullet. The bullet went into his head and exited through his ear. He somehow survived that, though, because it says that...
he somehow survived that.
Yeah.
So he got shot in the face, and he was... Okay, go on. I'm sorry.
Well, after he shot him, Delhomme was pleading, "Wayne, please don't." And then Wayne proceeded to strangle him to death. And they were both buried at High Island Beach as well.
Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
It just keeps going. That's the thing about your... we're like at an hour right now, and it's not edited or anything, but still, you know, like, I mean... This guy just keeps going and going and going. He's like the freaking Energizer Bunny. Like, it's ridiculous.
Let's see. So they were buried at the beach. And then the trio lured a 19-year-old named Billy Redinger to the house. He was tied to the plywood board, tortured, and abused by Corll. Brooks later claimed that he convinced Corll to let Billy go, and the teen left the residence.
Jeez.
I don't know why it would be hard to prove that. I mean, if you find him and ask him,
seems pretty straightforward.
If you can't find him, then probably they're full of shit.
Yeah.
If you can find him, then you need to know what he knows. You know.
Yeah.
So Brooks claimed that at one point during this time, Henley knocked him unconscious as he entered the house. So Brooks came through the door of Corll's house, and Henley, the second accomplice, whacked him. Knocked him unconscious, and when he woke up, he was tied to the bed, and Corll assaulted him repeatedly and then released him. Despite this event, Brooks continued to assist Corll in the abductions and murders of more victims.
That is ridiculous.
Yeah, so he walks in the door, the other accomplice knocks him out, he gets the same treatment as the other boys.
Just not killed.
And he still continues to just willingly go to this shit dick's house and just be like, okay, what's today's, like...
What's next?
Yeah, let's do this.
That is unfucking real. That guy had to be, just scared shitless or something? I mean, what would it be?
I'm fucking moving, though, like...
Man, I would think that would be an obvious choice, or going to the police or something.
Tell somebody
You know what I
something.
mean? But that you had to be in such a world of fear at that point.
I mean, you got to be real desperate for money to take that kind of shit for $200 a head, you know?
I know, right?
It's not an easy job anyway.
Yeah.
just being straight up. It's, hey, I'll give you $200, but you have to go, you have to deal with it consciously.
Yep.
But then at the same time, you have to go scout out somebody that you're friends with, find them.
Yeah, all your friends start disappearing. That's not suspicious.
Right.
You know what I mean?
I'd have been like, hey, what happened to the Boy Scouts? They're disappearing by the day.
Yeah, it's weird there was no connection made there, huh?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't seem, I guess Houston's a pretty big place. I don't know, but I think I would have.
So a figure, I don't know if I said this earlier, but at the time, Houston was experiencing 700 murders a year. This is the same time frame that we're pretty much talking with your guy and my guy, generally. So 70s.
So it was in Houston as well. And
1980 was I think the figure they used. It was 700 homicides a year.
Yeah, and your Corll came to Houston and killed somebody, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
he killed a lot of people, yeah.
Houston wasn't a safe place to be. Pasadena, stay the hell away.
Yep.
All that shit. Nope. I'm good.
Listen to episode 2, guys, and you'll learn a little bit about Houston. Houston's cool, but it's just it's just so big, and there is a lot of violent crime. So I mean, what city doesn't have violent crime? I had great food in Detroit, but you know what I mean.
My city doesn't have violent crime.
I know all 12 of us are doing okay. You know?
Yeah. The most you see is somebody throwing a McDonald's cup on the side of the road, or
Get them.
stealing somebody else's cow or some shit.
That's a difficult thing. Maybe chickens.
Yeah. So after Dean Corll moved from the Schuler residence, he moved to an apartment in Westcott Towers. In the summer of '72, he is known to kill a further 2 victims there. Stephen Sickman was 17 years old, and he was abducted after leaving a party shortly before midnight. He was bludgeoned about the chest with a blunt instrument, strangled, and then buried in the boat shed. On August 21st, Roy Bunton, while walking to his job at a shoe store, was shot twice in the head and buried in the boat shed. So,
Wow.
yeah, I mean, he was rapidly moving through them, you know.
So this all started. When did it start? Was it like 1971? 19.
Yeah, I believe it was 19.
And we're in what, 1970? What'd you say, 4 now?
2.
1972.
Yeah. Yeah, he's
Not a lot of time going by here.
1970 to 1973 was his crime spree.
Doesn't that already sound like a lifetime full of murderous achievements? I mean, Jesus.
If you think of the amount of years those kids should have lived,
Yeah.
he wasted hundreds of years at that point in a 3-year span. You know what I mean? He ended their lives short, and who
That's
knows?
an interesting way to think about it. He's wasted hundreds of years.
Exactly.
Hundreds of years of life have been taken.
Yeah.
And it's so easy to look at these situations and be like, okay, this one's body count is 80, but each individual person is a whole network of people that are affected. And I mean, it's so hard to grasp the importance and the weight of the situation when you look at it as often as we do. You know what I mean? But it's unfathomably terrible.
Yeah, it's really bad. And just think about all the potential, and what were ahead in their lives. You know what I mean? Like, what were they? We could have known some of them. Houston ain't far away, you know?
No, I know. Yeah, we got family there.
They could be on our Facebook friends list right now if they hadn't been killed as teenagers. You know what I mean? Like, you never know. I mean, this is the 70s. What would they be like in their 40s, 50s now?
Yeah. It's like Steven's friends.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
What up, Smizzle?
I can't do math today, but yeah, it's really tragic.
I can't do math any day, honestly.
Yeah. Well, on October 2nd of 1972, Henley and Brooks encountered Wally J.
That was my dad's 20th birthday.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. 10/2/52.
Your birthday's in October, too, yeah?
23rd. Mm-hmm.
Mine's the
my
4th.
Social Security number's actually...
Mine's the 4th, so...
Of what year?
86.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think Jeff is 76.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, I don't know his birthday. Just kidding. It's like June 29th, I think.
I was going to say, so he's exactly 10 years older than I am?
That'd be crazy.
So on October 2nd of 72, Henley and Brooks encountered Wally J. Simino, I believe is how you would pronounce
Wally
that.
J?
Yeah. And Richard Hembry. They were walking to Hembry's home. The two boys were enticed into David Brooks' Corvette and driven to Corll's apartment. Simino... There's a lot of letters in that name. He later called his mother's house. This breaks my freaking heart. I think you saw me researching this part, and I was like, oh, my God, that's awful. But
oh, man.
Simino, during the time he was at Corll's house, called his mother's house, and when she answered, he screamed, Mama, and then the phone was disconnected.
Oh, man. That's
rough.
gut-wrenching.
Yeah, that's bad. The following morning, Hembry was shot accidentally. Okay.
Accidentally?
We accidentally killed this guy in all our killings.
I know. We shot him an hour early. It was not planned. It was an unplanned murder.
He shot him in the mouth. Henley shot him in the mouth. And several hours later, both boys were strangled to death. Another one survived a shooting, I guess.
Well, if they're shooting him with a .22, it's very possible. It's like a BB,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
Several hours later, both were strangled and put in the boat shed. I wonder if he actually has a fucking boat. That'd be cool to know.
I don't think there's room. It would certainly be a bitch to drag it out every single time, it sounds like. I mean...
Well, who's this lady that lives nearby that's renting him this boat shed that's fucking empty, and he just continues
You know how it is out here in the woods. You know, I mean, there's a lot of random storage stuff. You can come and go as you please. It's not in line of sight. There's a lock on the gate. You know, it's perfect.
Yeah,
it really is. I mean, probably should have utilized the killing fields, but he didn't.
Right?
He didn't. So
He might have been caught.
yeah, you never know.
So the following month, 19-year-old Richard Kepner disappeared on his way to a phone booth.
I think I've heard that name.
I don't know. He was later found buried at High Island Beach. He had
Nope.
been strangled. Altogether, 10 teenagers between the ages of 13 and 19 were murdered between February and November of 72.
That's a lot.
Yeah. 5 were buried at High Island Beach. I don't know why I can't say that. It comes out as like one huge word.
Yeah, Highland.
High Island Beach.
Highland.
I'm like, Highline Beach. 5 were buried at the boat shed.
Wait, I thought you said there were like 17 at the boat shed.
5 of those in that time period were buried at the beach.
Okay.
And then 5 were buried at the boat shed.
Just from that time frame. Wow.
Right. In January of 73, Corll moved to an address on Wirt Road. Within 2 weeks, he had killed 17-year-old Joseph Lyles, a teen known to both Brooks and Henley. March of that same year, he vacated his Wirt Road apartment. So he was hopping all over the place. I mean, January to March.
Yeah, that's very, yeah.
And guess where he moved, Chris? Guess where he moved?
Oh, man. I don't know.
He moved to a previously vacated home in Pasadena that his father used to live in.
No kidding.
Yes.
It's a good spot for serial killers.
Yeah, he didn't kill anybody there. There were no known victims between...
Girls only. That's
right.
The 45 corridor is for girls only. Sorry if that's insensitive, but it does seem to be kind of true.
No shit.
I don't know. Maybe there's like serial killer meetings, and they're like, "Listen, we're going to draw a line.
My domain. Don't
you get the
cross
boat
it."
shed."
There are no known victims between February and June of 73. Corll was...
You said there was no known victims?
Yeah.
That's huge. What do you mean? Like he's just like done? He's like, oh.
From February to June. No, because he picked right back up. But he was experiencing health issues. And they told me what the health issues were when I was doing the research, but I didn't give a fuck because I hope he suffered. That's all I care. Like, I didn't have time for any other research on it. It was like to the minute on the line. Like, I got
if it was bacterial meningitis?
It was not. I know that.
Okay.
And during
I
this...
thought there might be a connection. Maybe there's some Corll meningitis detective work going on here. I don't know.
I don't know. Anybody out there, any listeners have meningitis?
Anyone
can tell us what your body count is. Is there any link between meningitis and violence?
Violent behavior. I'm serious. That's an interesting question.
Well, I think it's head injuries in general. I mean, a large number of serial killers have had brain damage or head injuries. You can't even count on both hands how many have been hit in the head with a friggin' swing. Like, 70s were a dangerous time at the playground.
It sounds like it.
Fucking seesaws creating serial killers.
Come home, a serial killer.
Yeah.
Jesus.
Went to go play and wound up.
Oh, man.
That's terrible.
Mm-hmm. I think about that, and I'm like, okay, Corll Watts was, he was 13 years old, he had meningitis, and then all of a sudden he starts really attacking people and stuff. But he did say it was before the meningitis that he started fantasizing about it. But it wasn't until a couple years later that he started killing. I mean, he was only 12 at the time, so it's not like he was going to jump into it immediately, I don't think. But there is speculation that he killed his first victim before the age of 14.
The lesson you take home today, if nothing else, is protect your fucking head and your kids. Like, helmets aren't so bad,
No kidding.
So he moved into that house, and he didn't kill between February and June of 73 because he was experiencing these health issues. And also during this time, Henley moved to Mount Pleasant in an effort to distance himself from Corll.
Okay. So it seems like this Henley guy was kind of back and forth, you know what I mean? Like he wanted to, and then he didn't want to, and then he got like super involved, and he was like, oh, I don't know if we should do, I don't know. He just seems like
Dipshit.
The one that's going to get him caught.
He's the Forrest Gump of accomplices. Can't get right.
Let's learn more about that.
So he distanced himself from Corll, but after that period ended, Corll's killings and the brutality inflicted on his victims ramped up dramatically. And I think that's where we'll stop for this week.
Yeah, absolutely. So
we'll get into his second win.
His violence ramps up after that? Because it sounds like he's already, in the club. I mean, it really does. He's,
I guess during his downtime, he was just thinking of extra shit he could do to be extra. I don't fucking know, but he didn't do anybody any favors after that. I guess I guess it's like a form of cabin fever. Like he just went too long without doing something.
Yeah,
and then,
it sounds like it. It's weird that he stopped after being so aggressive. You know what I mean? In the first place.
Well, and then he got like 3 times as aggressive. He was snatching people quicker. He was doing worse things to him. He was keeping them longer. He was,
Wow.
It was a whole bunch of fuck that. You know what I mean? It was.
And we'll talk about that more next week, huh?
Yeah, we're gonna move on. There was just too much. I mean.
That's all right. So we'll pick up with the rest of Dean Corll's story next week, and we appreciate you joining us for episode 3. And it's been a blast talking about the Corlls. So hopefully you hung in there with us, and check us out on Facebook. We got our Instagram up. I believe it's just the Grave Matter, right, Jill?
Yeah.
The Grave Matter. So
yep.
Find us on there, and
check out our Facebook.
More to come soon. Yeah, we have some good material on there. So we'll see you guys next week. Thanks.